sir.
2 minutes.
Yes, sir.
And 2 hours of lecture.
Yes, sir. We are happy to hear, sir. Yes, sir. Respected all, good evening to everyone. On behalf of Archaeological Survey of India, Trichy Circle from Tamil Nadu, this is Arun Raj and my colleague Dr. Yatish Kumar is sitting with me. We all would like to welcome for this third lecture series. This is the monthly lecture series we are organizing. This will be the third March month. So we are very happy that the noted prehistorian, that Professor Ravi Korishetter, sir, my teacher, agreed to deliver the third lecture. The topic of the today lecture will be on the archaeological research at the famous Neolithic site Sangankallu and public outreach, and also the site museum at Bellary. So sir is going to talk on this aspect today. As we all know very well, friends, because since that today discussion is about prehistory, as we all know very well, the Earth has originated 4,000 million years ago. In that 4,000 million years ago, last 600 million years only we are discussing because of the geological formation, that periods, eras, epochs. Out of 600 million years also, the last 2 or 3 million years only very important because of our presence of our ancestors. So this study, this prehistorical research, it is in India also, it is very popular among through various institutions like ASI and through the teaching institutions, particularly the universities. Yes, sir. So, so today in that prehistory only, the particular aspect of the Neolithic period only, that Sangankallu famous sites, sir is going to talk. Friends, it is my duty to introduce the speaker. Though the personality that today the speaker, whether it is Ravi Korishetter sir or S. Shettar sir, both needs no introduction because both the names Shettar and Ravi Korishetter both are inevitable names in the study of Indian history and archaeology. Then also it is my duty to brief about the academic achievements. Sir was formerly professor in Indian history and archaeology at Karnataka University, Dharwad, Karnataka. Currently, he is a senior academic fellow of the ICHR, New Delhi, and an adjunct professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. He has nearly 50 years of experience of exploration and excavation of archaeological sites in South India. His contribution to geoarchaeology, especially quaternary stratigraphy and teprochronology, is well recognized. His geoarchaeological research in the Kaladi Basin gained sufficient strength by the discovery of buried stone lines containing Acheulean artifacts that gave new leads to the reconstructing quaternary landscape. His work on the origin of agriculture in South India has realized in exciting results and helped establish the independent origins of Neolithic agriculture in South India, characterized by the domestication of local millets and pulses before the introduction of several crops from outside. Nearly 40 Neolithic sites distributed between the eastern and western Ghats in the lower Deccan region covering Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka were revisited by the Ravi Korishetter sir. At the end of his survey, he launched the excavation at Sangankallu, the today discussion, that is the famous Neolithic site. The results of this excavation have been widely published. His discovery of the volcanic ash site of Jolapuram and the follow-up excavation both at Jolapuram and Bilasargam caves in Kurnool districts of Andhra Pradesh, the eastern part lies in the Kurnool basin, opened up the ample scope of establishing the geochronology of the Paleolithic cultures and the documentation of hundreds of painted rock shelters, as well as the excavation of late Pleistocene occupation of the rock shelter by hunter-gatherers. The findings opened up the debate on when did the modern human enter India. In addition, the oldest known microlithics, stone beads, and fragmentary human remains were recovered from the rock shelter excavation ranging from the time of 35,000 to 12,000 years ago. Sir has adopted the site Sangankallu to preserve it for posterity and has saved this site from the granite mining. The word itself, adapting the archaeology site, it's very interesting. I think Sir will elaborate the exact meaning of adoption of the archaeological site. He has actively engaged in public outreach and has established the famous Robert Brucewood Museum at Robert Brucewood Sangankallu Archaeological Museum at Bellary in Karnataka. And Sir regularly conducts interactive sessions on archaeological heritage of the region with the school teachers in collaboration with Asim Premji Foundation. I think we may keep on elaborate about the Sir's academic achievements. I think Sir has written a lot of journals, articles in international and national journals. Also, Sir has written a number of books, also the edited volumes. If I remember correctly, 2 volumes are with me. I used to read. One is the ICHR, that publication in the year 2002. Sir as co-editor along with the Setar Sir, Indian Archaeology in Retrospect. Also, I have in my collection the recent one. Recent one means the 2017 one, Beyond Stones and More Stones, published by Mythic Society, Bengaluru. So with this all brief introduction, without wasting further time, I would like to request the today speaker, that Professor Ravi Korishetter sir, to deliver the talk on the given topic about the Sangankallu and the public outreach and the site museum. Yes, sir. We would like to welcome sir. Kindly, sir. Kindly can go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Arun, for giving me this opportunity to share my experience with the Neolithic archaeology, public outreach, and then venturing into the museum establishment projects, yes, and so on. And also, thank you for this introduction.
Yes,
I would like to straight away share the screen.
Definitely, sir.
You have to able me. You have to able me.
Okay, sir.
I'm disabled.
Now, sir. No.
Disabled. That still appears.
Post now. I think we did, sir.
Yes. Now it is.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is visible, sir.
Okay. Okay.
It's okay, sir. Yes, sir. It is in full screen.
Yes, it is in full screen, and this speaker view, if you can minimize, it will be better, because all of you can see the full screen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We did, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
No, it is not. Okay, I have done it, right? Once again, thank you. And why I selected this topic is because Robert Mortimer Wheeler, who was the last British Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, came out with a problem-oriented research into southern Indian, Neolithic or later prehistoric sites, excavated Brahmagiri, and came out with, what we call problem-oriented research agenda for Indian archaeology post-independence. And then he also developed excavation models for Indians and people outside India also could follow the methodology adopted by him. One for reconstructing culture history of a settlement, another for establishing, the way in which settlement patterns came across different landscapes, either in prehistoric context or in protohistoric context. And then also, he left this model of culture history reconstruction based on vertical excavations. And then at that point of time, while he was working in Brahmagiri, he did not go beyond vertical excavation. And that became a standard model for archaeologists working in South India, especially the region is rich in Neolithic and megalithic or early Iron Age and early historic sites. And many of these sites have a culture history beginning from the Neolithic to end of the Iron Age and beginning of the early historic and so on. And then he also, in a way, indirectly hinted at, because he was also excavating Harappa and then establishing a model for excavating, a horizontal excavation methodologies, and then reconstruct settlement patterns and then culture systems operating and so on and so forth. But yet, none in the Archaeological Survey of India were, interested in taking up large-scale excavations at any of the Neolithic sites in southern India. But for small-scale excavations at sites like Payampalli, Singanapalli, and so on and so forth. And then the problem of addressing culture history of these settlements became a paradigm for post-independence Neolithic archaeologists, Iron Age archaeologists in the Indian subcontinent. So that is one reason why I think, one another reason why I think Archaeological Survey of India did not launch a large-scale excavation project anywhere in southern India is because these sites do not carry the glamour of, Indus Valley sites. And then there is a lot of, excitement, delight, and also, frustration in excavating Harappan sites. But whereas in the context of Neolithic and Iron Age sites in India, in southern India, it was generally believed that not much information other than buildings, culture history can be attempted. But then this was a challenge to many of us because methodologies were developing, excavation methods, interpretation methods, documentation methods were all developing at a rapid scale. And why not? The sites which look miserable may contain very valuable information and then compete with those sites which are, known to be, the best is the archaeological projects, in the Indian subcontinent, so on and so forth. And post-independence, most of the archaeologists of the ASI, they're focusing their attention on discovering, Harappan and Harappan related sites in northern India. And so there was minimum of emphasis on, focusing on excavation of Neolithic and Iron Age sites. And it was largely left to the researchers of the university departments. And Deccan College is certainly in the forefront of looking at these Neolithic and Iron Age sites in southern India, as well as many dissertations which were produced both at Deccan College and other southern Indian universities were certainly contributing and revealing the potential of these sites for more detailed excavation and application of modern methods for reconstructing the life phase of the Neolithic and early Iron Age, and then the gradual transformation from simple agro-pastoral life ways to more complex political economies, which came to be well established by the time Mauryan expansion into southern India took place. And as you can see, my lecture has three distinctive components. One is a brief history of archaeological research at Sangankallu. Another is the public outreach. I'm not going to talk about what one should do, but I'm going to summarize what I have been able to do, and then present a brief account on the way in which these two areas, like research at Sangankallu Neolithic Iron Age site and the public outreach activity, contributed to establishing the site museum. Not exactly at the site. At the site, this museum is still under construction, whereas in the town of Bellary, about 5 kilometers east west of this site of Sangankallu, has already been established. A year ago, the museum came into existence, and as mentioned by Arun Raj, it has already been functioning and active in terms of interacting with school teachers, because our project at the museum aims at educating school teachers, especially primary level and middle level school teachers, so that they transmit information to their children about the importance of local heritage, and also bring them to the museum to give them a first-hand information, first-hand knowledge of what archaeology can contribute to understanding history and culture of the region in which these people are living, and so on. So archaeology of Sangankallu or Kuppugal, because the early literature always referred to this site as Kuppugal. Access to this particular site was via this particular village, Kuppugal. But in the last 30, 40 years, a new road has been laid to provide access to these archaeological site, and then of course access to connecting villages in the neighborhood, and that is where we have renamed the site as Sangankallu Neolithic Iron Age Complex and so on. And then when it comes to giving an account of archaeological research that has gone into this area, um, we can broadly see two stages of development. One is before identification, and then post-identification. So pre-identification and post-identification stages are very common to many of the Indian archaeological contexts. And then it is also the case with the Harappan situation, Harappan sites, their discovery, and then later identification, and the way in which large-scale investigations have been going on for the last 100 years or so. So similarly, archaeological research on the Neolithic sites in southern India is much older than in any other part of the Indian subcontinent. Certainly, it goes back to early part of the 19th century. Way back in 1803, the photographs that here I show you is the ash mound, and then a close-up of the ash mound, a section of the ash mound here, and then the photograph of Robert Brucewood. And then here in this particular photograph, you see another great archaeologist by name V. Subbarao. And these two people have played an important role in the archaeology of the Neolithic and Iron Age post-independence and post-identification days. And it was Robert Brucewood who ushered the post-identification archaeology, of the Neolithic and Iron of southern India and so on. So beginning with the work of Colin Mackenzie, he was the first Surveyor General of India. He was the one who was accompanied by local, guides by name Lachmaya and so on. While he was also an antiquarian and a keen observer of landscape, and that is where he was able to identify something unusual amidst these hills and valleys and so on. And while this particular kind of hill looks very natural, and this one was looking very different from the adjacent landscapes and so on. And so he was sure there is something related to human activity here. And then he alerted T.J. Thomas Newbold, and who was also a geologist. He was serving the British Army. He was in the Madras Regiment and was posted in Kurnool for some time. Because of his antiquarian interest, I am reminded of ACL Carlyle, who used to, he was a very eccentric archaeologist, geologist, and so on. So he used to go deep into the forests of central India in search of tribal settlements. Similarly, Thomas Newbold was another, individual who can be compared with the work. In fact, he is a predecessor to Carlyle here. He was the one who discovered the famous Billasargam caves, which were later excavated by Robert Brucewood and his son and so on. And that was a problem-oriented research at Billasargam. While he was in Kurnool, he also went around, the Madras Presidency, northern part of the Madras Presidency, and then he visited the site of Puduthini Ash Mound. And then he was very keen on looking at the sections exposed along the the sites of this particular ash mound. He collected some samples, and he did not stop there. He went in search of similar mounds in the neighborhood of this area, and then came down to Sangankallu, which was earlier known as Kupugal. Perhaps he was the first archaeologist as a geologist, he was the first archaeologist to look at the ash mounds and discover the ash mounds at the base of the large hill near Sangankallu. He not only discovered, he dug into one of them and collected samples and sent them for identification. And that is where the first publication on the composition of this particular deposit was published as note on the occurrence of volcanic scoria. Because of the slag-like material, vitrified horizons that we see at different places here, gave him an impression that it is a volcanic material, which is a product of a volcanic eruption and so on. And then this vitrified material looked like a slag for them. And then, of course, the detailed chemical analysis was not carried out at that point of time. So he came out with this first publication, and that heralded the Neolithic archaeology of, southern India. Of course, prior to the identification of this particular ash mound as part and parcel of Neolithic way of life, agro-pastoral way of life, and so on, until the coming of Robert Brucewood, who came he came to Bellary, although he was based in Madras from 1858, and he was by then very famous for the discovery of Pallavaram site, and then many more related sites in different parts of Madras Presidency. He was also posted in Bellary because he was a geologist. He had to prepare geological resource maps for the British India, And then, he was a keen observer like any of his contemporaries and predecessors. And so he was very particular about looking at these landscapes beyond geology. And he was the kind of person who never left any stone unturned, kind of a situation, the kind of a competent archaeologist, geologist, prehistorian, climatologist, and many, many things. He has been aptly described by one of the articles by Dr. Shanti Kapoor, which has been published in Man and Environment several years ago. And he was the one who came to Bellary in 1870. That was his first visit. And then when he was visiting Bellary, there was one William Fraser, a civil engineer, who ushered him to the site of Kopgal or Sangankallu. And that is where he was introduced to the Neolithic site. And then, of course, he did not stop there. During this first visit, he was able to visit only part of the hill, and that was the southern part of the hill, and see certain features, scattered on the certain features visible on the surface, and also began to very curiously gather small implements in terms of beads made from varieties of cryptocrystal and silica minerals. And then he was also struck by the fact that granitic landmass cannot be a host to this kind of raw materials. And so he was wondering about provenancing these raw materials which were used for making beads and so on. In addition to that, he also came down to Kudithani, made much more. Sorry?
Sir, one second. Sorry for interrupting. Some of my classmates are requesting to join this session. Can you please accept the request?
I have no problem.
Yeah.
The host has to permit.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
We are admitting, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so when Food came in the 1870s, he was also living in a bungalow which is known as now Food's bungalow, 3 or 4 kilometers northeast of this particular site, that is called Naroji Tank, where one of his daughters was also born in 1870-71 during that period. And so he made very close observations, and then he was also convinced that this is not volcanic scoria, and this is certainly related to human activity associated with Neolithic agropastoral way of life. And then he also observed the presence of varieties of potsherds, and then he also saw varieties of animal bones, and then of course portable kind of food processing stone implements such as querns, mullers, corn crushers, and so on and so forth. And he was also aware of the Jariba way of accumulating cow dung and then setting it on fire in Africa and so on. He drew parallels, and then he was very, very convinced that this is a Neolithic monument, a monument built by the Neolithic agropastoral people and so on and so forth. And then post identification, archaeological and investigations into the ash mound has been going on. And this is one very important book which was published a year ago, and a comprehensive account of history of research into the ash mounds associated with Neolithic sites and so on. And if anybody is interested in knowing more about the ash mound and the interpretations that have gone into the ash mound problem, can have a look into this particular book written by Dr. K. Padaya of Deccan College. Okay, and then we see that there are several people who have contributed to understanding what is this. Apart from Thomas Newbold's attempt at explaining what these ash mounds are, and before Robert Brucewood came down and then associated these ash mounds with the Neolithic people, there were these famous, antiquarians, archaeologists, and then geologists were looking at these, administrators, working in the Bellary area, looking at this particular deposit very, very curiously. And then they came out with their own understanding and interpretation of the formation processes, cultural processes behind the formation of these mounds and so on. So it was Newbold. He was followed by what we call James Prinsep, well known for deciphering the Brahmi script, and also the person who also looked at this particular material while he was in Kolkata, because samples for analysis were sent by Newbold to the Asiatic Society in Bengal. Following that only, he wrote that paper in 1836. And then Prinsep and Newbold thought that these ash mounds are volcanic scoria. And then some people like Dr. Baines and others, they thought that these are limestone deposits or limestone slags. And then you have others looking at these finer soft parts of this particular ash mound and describing that as travertine deposit. It also looks like calcium carbonate, very fine calcium carbonate deposit. So travertines are associated with ancient lakes and so on. But anyway, there were these people who also tried to interpret cultural factors as well as natural factors as responsible for the formation of these ash mounds and so on. And then you have these Longhurst, who was working on behalf of the Archaeological Survey of India. He said that these are all cremation grounds, mass cremation grounds, where there were these rakshasas contributing to accumulation of carcass, and which was set on fire and so on. And then Robert Sewell, the famous collector of Bellary, who wrote the famous book that is The Forgotten Empire. And then since he wrote that book, the archaeological historical reconstruction of the Vijayanagara kingdom empire began. That was the basis. And he was also contributing to understanding some of these very enigmatic mounds that were replete on the landscape, not only in the Bellary area, but across the entire northern Karnataka and now the western Andhra Pradesh and so on. And then some of the geologists based in Gulbarga University looked at this particular ashy layers. There is some interference. You should mute them. Mute all the attendees' mic. So these geologists began to look at this slag or vitrified, part of these ash mounds in terms of glass manufacturing activity. And then you have, Leonard Moon, who was working for the Nizam's dominion. He had also come across a large number of these ash mounds in the northern part of Bellary district, that is in the Raichur Doab area, where Alchin later carried out a detailed study of early cultures of Raichur Doab and so on. And so, but it was Yazdani and Mun who contributed to identifying many such monuments, and then it is post-food identification of these ash mounds as part and parcel of Neolithic agro-pastoral economy and so on. So most of the information that we have about the archaeology of the southern Neolithic, which now we call the southern Neolithic province, is largely an adaptation to plain open country grasslands in a semi-arid environment and so on. So these are some of the publications which I would not like to go into detail of all these individual publications. Certainly, the contribution of Robert Bruceford stands out beginning from 1873, and then his work on the Bellary, geology of Bellary district. He came there in order to prepare detailed maps of geological formations, and also incidentally he had a keen eye for archaeological sites. He has discovered as many as 160 to 180 archaeological sites ranging in time from lower Paleolithic to Neolithic and Iron Age and so on. Maximum. Can I request the host to mute everybody?
Sir, actually, sorry, sir, that now due to some mistake, host is आपके पास ही है, sir, host. इसलिए वो हो रहा है. Yes, sir.
I can't mute them.
I think Selva Kumar sir has to mute, sir. Selva Kumar sir.
Just let me know.
Yes, sir. I think yes, sir. Selva Kumar sir, kindly mute your mic, sir.
Okay. So these three publications, these four publications give us a clear idea of food's contribution to documenting and mapping the range of archaeological sites in this region, southern Indian region. And also this particular book, this particular memoir, which is called Geology, the Bellary district is very, very important for archaeologists because, as I said, when he came to Bellary or visited Sangankallu in 1870, he saw those, large number of small implements, especially beads made from variety of these cryptocrystalline minerals. And so he was wondering about provenancing the source. And so he, in this particular book, the Bellary district geology memoir, contained a chapter called economic geology. As early as the 1880s, 1890s, he was fully aware of this particular aspect of understanding the ranging habits of these Neolithic people, and that they were able to locate resources essential for producing varieties of these artifact assemblages that we have now documented from a number of these archaeological sites and so on. So as I mentioned, Robert Sewell was also not only interested in looking at these ash mounds and looking at this historical heritage of Hampi and so on, but he was the first person to identify rock art at Sangankallu. Although the credit has been given to Fawcett, the person who discovered the Edakal caves, as the first person rock art at Sangankallu. But it was a year before Fawcett's visit. It was Robert Sewell who published this article, the American Journal of Archaeology and the History of the Fine Arts, about detailing about his observations on variety of these Neolithic rock bruisings, and that laid the foundation for this study of rock art associated with Neolithic and Iron Age communities living in this particular region. So Robert Sewell also wrote a small article on cinder mounds of Bellary, where he described his own understanding and his interpretation of the processes responsible for the formation of these ash mounds and so on. And then you have Longhurst, as I mentioned earlier. He published this, the cinder mounds at Kudithini. And finally, it was all, a sort of consensus amongst the workers post Robert Brucefoot's identification. And these are cinder mounds, dung mounds, and so on and so forth. It is not simply cattle dung, but it is a mix of dung from various other domesticated animals as well. And so it is not said necessarily cattle dung. And Neolithic people were not necessarily cattle keepers, but they also domesticated sheep, goat, and so on. I will elaborate a little bit more as we go through this presentation. And then these two catalogs are excellent, sort of Bible for many archaeologists working in different parts of southern and western India and so on. And then he has led many of us into the archaeology because he was a geologist, but he did his primary, redeemed his responsibility by providing these catalogs and the detailed information about the sites and nature of cultural material he had collected with brief descriptions and so on. That helped many. And one of the foremost and the most eminent student of illustrious student of Robert Brucefoot happens to be the late Professor H.D. Sankallu, and that is where he led many of his students to retrace the footsteps of Robert Brucefoot across this region where he had surveyed, and chief among them was D. Subbarao, who focused his attention on Bellary district and so on. So he published, this was part of his PhD dissertation and published in 1949. And then this was the time, when Professor Sankallu was there to give him, an academic advice, and Wheeler's work was there to inspire him. And then he himself was an archaeologist past excellence. And so he was the one who, again, followed the model of Mortimer Wheeler and excavated at Sangankallu, one of the hills of Sangankallu, and came out with his own reconstruction of the culture, history, and so on. Garden was another, archaeologist who looked at the rock art following, Robert Sewell and also Fawcett and so on. And then we have, in post-independence, we also see Zoyner coming in at the invitation of Professor Sankallu, visiting several of the sites which were previously discovered by Robert Brucefoot, not only Paleolithic sites, but also Neolithic sites, and in particular, the ash mounds. And then he went a step further by doing chemical analysis and then determined the temperature at which, this scattered dung was set on fire in order to, attain this kind of, formation. It has vitrification layers, soft ash layers, and then again vitrified layers and so on. So it was very sure that this was, purely a dung deposit, and they were all set to high temperatures, up to about 800 to 900 degrees and so on. So he put to rest all kinds of confusion, and then mix-up of understanding relating to the formation of these ash mounds. They are dung mounds. They were set on fire with high temperatures and so on. And Professor Sankalya led some of his students, not only B. Subbarao, but later Ansari and MS Nagaraj Rao, and he himself came to the Sangankallu area and then excavated at different localities in the site complex, and then they published them. 1969 was this, and Ansari and Nagaraj Rao also published. It was something like reopening the trenches of B. Subbarao and then making fresh observations and adding few more trenches to what Subbarao had done and so on. And then later in the 1970s, it was Professor Joshi and his students who came back to many of these sites. And one among them was this Kapgal Sangankallu Neolithic site. And they collected these anthrosols or habitation soils for carrying out chemical analysis following the method of earth and so on, in order to determine the concentration or variation of phosphate, fluorine, nitrogen, and so on in animal bones, as well as in the habitation soils and non-habitation soils and so on, in order to decipher or in order to delineate the activity areas, across the cultural landscape at a number of these, Neolithic and of course Chalcolithic and other sites as well. But he also came to Sangankallu and followed up with his own investigations in terms of modern methods of understanding, the chemical, analysis, chemical composition of habitation soils as well as opposed to non-habitation soils and so on. Alchins and all had collected a lot of information about the rock-hearted Sangankallu Kapgal area. And then perhaps it was in cold storage for some time, but they came out with this publication in 1995. And so in the year 1997 onwards, we began our own, this systematic resurvey of many of these Neolithic sites across the region between Eastern and Western Ghats. And this was the time when we had a lot of information about the material cultural makeup of the Neolithic cultures, not only at Sangankallu, at several of these sites, as a result of investigations carried out by a number of archaeologists in Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and also southern part of Maharashtra and so on. But we didn't have much information about the agricultural economy, because this was the time the site of Inamgaon had witnessed multidisciplinary investigations and reconstruction of agricultural economies in terms of package of food crops that were cultivated during the second and third, second millennium BC to first half of the first millennium BC and so on. And so, although these sites were excavated and investigated much earlier than those sites in the Deccan region or what Deccan Chalcolithic sites, we thought it should be of great interest to go back to the Neolithic sites which have already been excavated, well excavated, which did not have a firm absolute radiocarbon chronology and also information about the agricultural food crops that were cultivated. We had some information about the animal remains, but then the detailed analysis of man-animal relationships were not well established. It was limited to identifying these animal remains in terms of cattle, in terms of sheep, in terms of goat, and also in terms of and then this project between 1999 and 2009, we were able to add a lot of information about the agricultural economy and also establish a firm absolute chronology based on AMS dating and so on and so forth. So this is the general background of the brief background of historical perspective of research that has gone into the Neolithic of the southern India and so on. And then, as I said, Sanarachama was excavated by Subbarao, and later it was excavated again by Ansari and MS Nagaraj Rao. And then Dr. Sankalya also did some trial excavations in the in the plains around these hills. Most of these Neolithic localities were on tops of the hill. But Sankalya was very keen on identifying pre-Neolithic, evidence of pre-Neolithic occupation and so on. So Subbarao's excavation at Sanarachamaguda had indicated the presence of Neolithic polished stone axes, pottery of megalithic and iron Neolithic periods and so on. But in 1948, he dug two trenches, one at the middle of the plateau, identified 10 layers, and another at the base of a rock shelter where he found 13 layers. So these two trenches gave him a clear picture of the development of the settlement in terms of culture history in three phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. at the base, you have a patinated flakes and then microliths and so on. So they suspected that it is pre-Neolithic at that point of time. And then phase 2 was characterized by the presence of stone cells, flakes, microliths, ceramics, and several other of these, earthenware pottery varieties and so on. And then phase 3 was polished black and red ware. Indirectly, following the, the culture history model from Brahmagiri, but he did not have similar sequence from Stone Age to Iron Age to early history, but he had this pre-Neolithic to Neolithic to transition to Iron Age and so on. And then Ansari and Nagaraj Rao came back in 1964 at the time when they were excavating at Tekkalakota. They took time off and then came to Sanarajamagudda, reopened the trenches of B. Subbarao and added many more in terms of seven trenches were dug on the same hill. And then they found pre-Neolithic prepared core assemblage made of dolerite. And dolerite is such a dubious raw material to definitely identify whether the artifacts made on dolerite are, Paleolithic or Neolithic. They're definitely Neolithic. And this is one geological terrain where you have no access to typical quartzite, sandstone, or chert kind of raw material from which you could, certainly identify the Paleolithic artifacts. But here, the dolerite was the most dominant raw material, and perhaps they made a mistake in identifying them as pre-Neolithic and so on. And similar mistake perhaps was committed when they described the tool industry at Chittoor, on the Tungabhadra River, again on a dolerite flake. Because I am saying this statement because I also encountered large number of these dolerite, assemblages, and they were certainly not small. And so, these particular sequence, because what kind of countries they have occurred to them.
I request all the participants to mute. Kindly. Excuse me, I request all the participants to mute. Sorry, sir.
You exit them. You exit them. If you know who is doing,
yes, sir.
You exit them. Can you talk?
Yes, sir,
can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So they dug 7 more trenches, and then, as I said, they were very keen on identifying pre-Neolithic, whether it is middle or lower, and so on and so forth. It happened, and they published 2 articles. One was published as a report, and another was part of the article published in Hill Station volume. And then here they found 3 phases of occupation. They also found house floors with post holes and so on, and the house floors were plastered with lime, and then you have these circular houses, which I will gradually show. And then they also suspected the presence of an ash mound on top of the hill, because till then only 3 ash mounds were known from the base of the hill and so on. So this Kupgal ash mound, which were known since the time of Robert Brucefoot or since the time of Newbold, were again after the work of Joyner. Majumdar and Rajguru came back at the time when this site was re-investigated by Deccan College, and they also dug at one of the ash mounds, and then also came out with similar observations which were earlier made by F.E. Joyner, and they had no doubt about the fact that this is a dung mound and this was a cattle dung, and then it was set on fire, and then at the same time, during this time, the Palavai ash mound was also taken up for similar study and so on. And Majumdar being a chemist and Professor Rajguru being a geologist, their expertise was contributing to confirming the observations of the eminent environmental archaeologist, that is F.E. Joyner. And then at the same time, when Professor Sangankallu was trying to look at the microlithic assemblages scattered on the surface in the plains around these hill complexes, and Sangankallu was also keen on identifying pre-Neolithic here. And then, though he found in a buried context the presence of microliths, he was very sure that they are pre-Neolithic. But our recent survey, we found that the entire landscape is strewn with what we call quartz shingles. And then the hilltops were the places where stone axes were manufactured. and associated microlithic industry, microlithic assemblages were produced at the base of the hill, and then these shingle beds, quad shingle beds, which are a product of landscape evolution through geological time, were the very easily available, accessible sources for producing microliths and so on. So then, following this, the Bellary District Archaeological Project, of which I was the director, and co-director was Nicole Boyven and Dorian Fuller and so on. And then we investigated over 7 or 8 years, and then came out with our own, results and findings and interpretations and so on. Particularly, establishment of the chronology is very, very important. So, as mentioned earlier, it was Nagaraj Rao and Ansari's excavation which revealed the house floors plastered with lime and circular plan of the houses with post holes and so on. And then you have these boulders which are called tors at the base of the large hill, where we have paintings on the outer surface, and then within the crevices of these boulders, you have thick deposit of microliths produced from what we call quartz shingles and so on. The close-up of these paintings here, because of the damage caused by quarrying activity, we have lost major part of the paintings here, but still we can trace the features, painted features here, and then we have been able to reconstruct the panels and so on. And then, in addition to that, on top of the hill, you have these huge granitic boulders which have these concave hollows. We call them bedrock mortars. So they have multiple functions that they have performed. One is for polishing the stone axis. Another is processing or grinding grains and so on. So this can be distinguished based on high resolution microphotography of the textural variation between and among these bedrock mortars, or what we may call querns in simple language. Then we also have these megalithic structures which belong to the later time period. And then across the plateau, you have dense occurrence of this kind of cobbles and pebbles and boulders of dolerite, which are quarried from the dike which runs through the hill. These are discarded pieces of dolerite, and then this dolerite was the chief raw material for producing millions of polished stone axes. I say millions, okay. And then I said Foote was the first person to identify variety of these beads, objects of ornament, existence of a lapidary in the context of this Neolithic Iron Age complex site. You have cornelian beads, you have steatite beads, you have agate beads, and then chert beads, and so many other raw material minerals were utilized. They don't occur in the granitic rock. They were procured from a distance of 20 kilometers or so. And then their dense occurrence on the surface and also in the excavated sections clearly established the fact that this was a major lapidary which existed, perhaps the late Neolithic to early Iron Age transitional time periods and so on. In addition to that, we have these well-made stone cells, and then the large scale manufacture of these stone cells were not in the Neolithic period, but in the later period, the late Neolithic to early Iron Age transition time period, which I will gradually show you. And then you have variety of these handmade pottery, which was initially identified by B. Subbarao, and later workers also confirmed the presence of variety of these earthenware pottery, ranging from handmade to wheel-made, ranging from sun-dried to well-fired bichrome pottery and so on and so forth. These numbers that I've shown here, they refer to the quantity collected during the course of our investigations at Sangankallu. In addition to that, we also have copper objects, we also have precious metal, and then it's a minority no doubt, but we do have copper bangles, copper axes, and then you have these objects which were partially modified, but unfortunately intact pieces of objects of this particular precious metal was not recovered. We do have copper beads and so on. Yeah, I mentioned about this wheel-made black and red bichrome pottery. This is certainly typically Iron Age pottery. It was well established stratigraphically by Wheeler at Brahmagiri, and finding similar pottery across this landscape over a vast area is not surprising. And we do have this black and red ware occurring at upper levels in the cultural strata that we have excavated. And in addition to that, we do have other older varieties of pottery continuing And then we have both handmade as well as wheel-made pottery. At this point of time, its dominance is the wheel-thrown black and red ware of the megalithic tradition that is widespread or ubiquitous across the southern Indian landmass and so on. In addition to that, we do have remnants of these ash mounds which were not previously documented. And during the course of our investigations, we found that even on top of the hills, at different points along the slope of the hills, also these vitrified ash lumps are still lying. Perhaps there was a large ash mound because of this kind of damage. These ash mound only remains of that particular ash mound have been documented from this particular site. Among the 5 hills, this is the hill which is known as Chodamma Gudda, and then you have Sadashiva Gudda. Sandarachama was excavated by Subbarao, and Hiregudda, is one of the oldest localities in this particular site complex where investigations have been going on since the 1870s. And then the Dolerite dike, which cuts through this particular granitic rock mass, was the main source of dolerite raw material. These are some of the ancient mine pits from which these raw material blocks were procured, and then the flint knapping took place at the site itself, on the plateau itself, and this is the deposit of the waste products, debris, what we call, and sometimes running to a depth of about 1 meter or even more. You can imagine the intensity of workshop activity, manufacturing activity of the stone cells. And these are some of the discarded ones because the well-made finished ones were taken away from the site, and perhaps they were part and parcel of the large network of exchange system prevailing during the late Neolithic and early Iron Age and so on. And in addition to those querns, or what we call bedrock mortars, these are other features which are very, very important features that are still preserved in the landscape, not only on top of the hill, but at various points on the landscape. These are deep grooves, V-shaped grooves, where edges of these axes were sharpened. So grinding grooves, they are plenty, and very much fits into this particular scheme of events there. Procuring raw material, reducing the raw material to various types of triangular, polished stone axes, waste products, lying on this plateau surface, and then the way, the finishing of the artifacts was carried out and so on. This is that huge boulder. I mentioned earlier is Birappa rock shelter, which is the center where the microliths were produced. This is the landform, where you have a dense occurrence of shingles of quartz, and quartz is disintegrated from the veins within the larger, granitic rock mass, and geological processes were responsible for disintegration of this granite, and then the formation of these shingle beds, across the landscape all over this area, and they were readily available for making microliths. And then this is one situation where we have a radiocarbon date which goes back to 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, but we are unable to fit into the scheme of chronology that we have developed. But there is a possibility that there is a pre-Neolithic here, or at the same time, there is a possibility they were very much part and parcel of the Neolithic stone axe manufacturing activity, as well as microlithic manufacturing activity and so on. And then what? This is the kind of situation we experienced when we started going to the site in 1997. Our project was to recover as much as the habitation soil from exposed levels in order to reconstruct the agricultural economy, especially the food crops that were cultivated from this site. But this was a miserable situation, And then, I'm also showing this for another reason, that if this is the situation in 1997, and we did not care, for the site, and we did not launch our outreach activity, the site would have been completely erased in the last 20 years or so. And so destruction beyond imagination. And then such a huge site, perhaps the largest Neolithic site complex anywhere in southern India, beyond 1,200 acres of land. So what we can do? So to save the site, to document the site, and then what else we can do from this particular team of archaeologists who are concerned about the protecting the site or saving the cultural data for posterity, and whatever we could do, in our lifetime, even 100 years more, several teams of archaeologists and go back to this site, and then each time we go back, we will find something new which was missed by the previous and so on. So given the condition we saw the site, we thought we should resurvey, we should start mapping, and then launch excavation, and also that might lead for rediscovery and so on and so forth. So the first and foremost thing that we did was total station mapping, and this helped us integrate all cultural features, which were, in other words, previously studied in isolation. So we thought we should have a cultural system and a landscape system which will help us integrate all cultural features and then come out with a better understanding of the cultural processes operating either from pre-Neolithic time onwards to post-Neolithic Iron Age, and then till the time the sites were abandoned towards the end of the Iron Age around 500 BC or so and so on. So what we can see here, these are the legends which help us to understand the localities that we designated for detailed investigation, and at each of these localities we carried out excavations and systematic documentation and collection of material for analysis, identification, and dating, and so on. So you have this dolerite dike running up and through the entire length and breadth of this large hill, which is known as Hireguda. And then we have these excavated here areas shown with excavated quarries which were dug by vandals. And then, of course, these exposures were useful initially for us to document and then collect samples for pilot study and so on. And then you have these Neolithic occupations at various points. This is not the only spot where occupation took place, but these are the points where we carried out excavation. And then you have ash mounds on top of the hill. Initially these three ash mounds were noted by Thomas Newbold, and then it was Robert Goosefoot who described them in detail in his accounts. And then later, when we started reinvestigations, when Nagaraj Rao and Ansari suspected the presence of an ash mound on top of this hill, we took the coup and then looked at very carefully at all the exposures, and then were successful in documenting the presence of ash mounds in a buried context. Perhaps ash mounds associated with agropastoral communities were the first locales where the settlements began to take shape, and subsequently the village systems began to develop. And then with the expansion of the areas covered by the later villages, these ash mounds which are exposed to surface came to be buried and so on. And then the excavations on Sannara Chammaguda, a reopening of Subbarao's trenches, reopening of Nagaraj Rao and Ansari's trenches, and then their suspicion that there is an ash mound buried here was confirmed by this excavation, because it is, earlier Subbarao also noted that there are ashy layers, but then the limited nature of excavation did not permit them to theorize or permit them to, expect the presence of an ash mound and so on. But this, expansion of the trenches, in a continuous manner enabled in identifying a buried ash mound and so on. This is not unique to this large hill. It has also been found in other hills as well. So these are the features that we saw already indicating intensity of stone axe manufacturing activity at Sangankallu and so on. And here I would like to show you the plateau surface, which I would now like to call it as Robert Goosefoot Point, because he was the one, when he came back in 1885, in the first visit, he only visited the southern part of this hill, and in the second visit, he visited the northern part, and that is where he found these, circular features contiguous to one another and also opposite to one another, separated by an avenue or a passage. And this is the waste product of stone axe manufacturing activity. And then he noticed this, not only he noticed this debris, but also finished stone cells. And then he came to the conclusion as early as 1885, this was a large Neolithic stone axe. Maybe now we revise it to, early pre-Iron Age, stone axe manufacturing site and so on. These blocks of granite, which show cupules and then again grooves, are associated with these circular features. And each of these circular features is associated with this, indicating the fact these axes were manufactured. This is a workshop come residence of the occupants of this particular plateau, and then they were finishing these artifacts. The edges were sharpened here, and the butt end was also rounded in these cupules and so on. And this is the waste product, sometimes 1 meter, sometimes more than 1 meter, and then less than 1 meter. What is important here to note is the presence of a buried ash mound. And this, even on this large hill, you have an ash mound. So from 3 ash mounds in 1870 to 7 at mounts in 2002. That is the kind of advancement we made in terms of identifying the buried features, you know. So one of those features was excavated, and then you can see here another block of granite with the deep, grooves indicating intensity of workshop activity here. And all that you see in this box is nothing but the flake debitage resulting from stone axe manufacturing activity. And so the blocks of dolerite were procured from those outcrops. The initial skinning was done, and a rough triangular form was achieved. And then the flakes, the pecking resulted in reducing the thickness of these, triangular, rock mass. And then the initial grinding gave rise to smooth surfaces, and intensity of grinding and polishing was carried out, resulting in the formation of a well-made polished stone axe. These are called cells, and this is a site where perhaps, as I said, millions of these stone axes were manufactured, and then they were put across the entire network of Neolithic settlements. If you stand at Sangankallu and look around in any direction, every 2 or 3 kilometers you have a Neolithic site. Unfortunately, they are not well preserved. So this is the surface on which these bedrock mortars can be documented. If you use this surface, for a short period, you have a very, very shallow, ground surface, a shallow mortar here. And then if you use it for longer duration, and then you have a deeper one. And then if the intensity continues for longer time, you have a much deeper, what we call a mortar. It is not a quern kind of a thing for, producing, processing grains, but these were the hollows where these stone axes were polished. And this is an abrasive by itself. And the dolerite is a very fine-grained raw material, and whereas this is a crystalline granitic raw material, is a coarse grinding, and then grinding and achieving smooth surface on the dolerite was much easier, while by rubbing these rough stage 3 axes for finishing them as stone cells and so on. And a close-up of these grooves where edges were sharpened and so on. So the next in order is the work that was begun by Robert Sewell and also Fawcett and Gordon and Ulchins, that rock art is abundant here, and the dolerite dike is the main site where you have thousands of these Neolithic rock art distributed on the summit of the hill. And then the dolerite was the preferred surface on which these buoyings were made. And what we see in the assemblage of these imageries in this particular context is a special place accorded to this, bull, what we call, the cattle figurines. This was an animal which was which was a deified animal, which was a fertility cult prevalent amongst these people. In addition to that, we also have other animals, part and parcel of this animal environment depicted here. And this hill is also known as Peacock Hill because this was the habitat for peacocks. We have seen peacocks in this area, and also the Neolithic people were familiar with peacocks and so on. But this particular bull occupies a special place amongst the Neolithic and early Iron Age community in this area. These rock art sites are also associated with this, what we call blocks of dolerite with cupules along the margin of these blocks. And these cupules are ringing rocks. They have been found across the entire Neolithic landscape in this area. And if you tap them systematically, you can produce rhythmic musical gongs. And perhaps, their association with the, bull imagery, perhaps this was in association with the performance of certain fertility rituals, and then the music, which is part and parcel of any ritual, is also, convincing in terms of relationship between rock art and then the existence of some of these blocks. Otherwise, they have no place. And these features were studied independent of one another. But the approach to integrate these cultural features into a total station map was facilitating, to articulate these features and then bring them to life. And that is an attempt that was made by us. We still have to go back into this particular system and then try to understand the ritual aspect of the ash mound formation, as well as the worship of the bull as a fertility deity and so on. And then we also did extensive collection of soil samples for collecting archaeobotanical and also faunal material. So the bucket flotation and then sieving and then drying them up in sun and so on and so forth, and was carried out, and then they were taken to laboratory for sifting and separating and then identifying and using electronic microscopes, and then also conducting experiments, and then having an extensive reference collection of both animals and then food crops, facilitated in reconstructing the food economy right from the early stages to later time periods and so on. So the faunal studies have been going on for a very long time, and this helped this helped us in understanding the man-animal relationship based on our recent research, and then whether these animals were Neolithic and whether the Neolithic and Iron Age societies were dominantly cattle pastoralists or sheep-goat herders. The point here is there is no statistical data available, but based on the information and the statistical analysis that we have made for the collection of animal remains from these excavated sites at Sangankallu, we are very sure that the pastoral economy was primarily based on sheep-goat pastoralism, and then of course the presence of cattle cannot be ruled out. It is present very dominantly, but they had a special place, ritual place amongst the people who domesticated these animals, so on. Animals' bones from domestic context contain more bones of goats and sheep because they form the chief component of their diet. And then the staphonomical features on these bones certainly give us evidence of cut marks, boiling, crushing for extraction of marrow, and so on and so forth. And so these two meat animals were the components of the diet in addition to food crops they were cultivating. And then the cattle bones do not reveal any of these taphonomical features. So uneven bones of cattle and other larger animals do not seem to form the food waste like these remains of these animals. And so their natural death, their presence in ash mounds or in the habitation deposits seems to be the result of animals dying a natural death. So animal bones from ash mounds were dominated by cattle and other larger animals, and less number of these animals representing sheep and goat and so on. So there is this particular relationship that the domestication, pastoralism, and they served multiple purposes. This certainly cattle was a ritual animal, and then these were the animals which became part and parcel of their subsistence economy. And then archaeobotany was very, very productive because this research only helped us in identifying native food crops. And then it was generally thought for a very, very long time, agriculture in the southern Neolithic was a minor occupation, whereas the agricultural economy flourished with the introduction of crops from northern Deccan into from the northern Indus area via North Deccan into the southern Neolithic context and so on. All this has been ruled out by our investigations, and we have been able to identify basic food crops which were cultivated right from the beginning, early Neolithic. Of course, the sites here are in the range of 2200 BC onwards. Older sites in the northern part of this region go back to 3000 BC and little more. And possibly even earlier sites dating back to 3500 BC are also there, which are yet to be discovered. But that is one crucial problem that we have to address in the future. So the basic food crops that we found in the Neolithic agricultural package was 2 pulses and 2 millets. So Setaria verticillata and Brachiaria ramosa, and then Macrotylomon vigna radiata. So these are bristly foxtail millet, brown top millet, horse gram, and mung bean. They formed the staple food crops in the early stages, indicating the fact these agropastoral communities right from the early stages were domesticated or cultivating these pulses and also millets, local millets, until the cereal crops from the northwest or cereal crops from northeast, as well as the pulses from northern part of the Deccan were introduced at a much later time. So this time period here goes back to about 22 to 2400 BC. And these are the early food crops that we see in the archaeological record at Sangankallu and so on. From about 1900 BC, we see wheat and barley introduced from the Indus Valley via northern peninsula. And then we do have direct radiocarbon dates because the charred grains of all these food crops have been recovered through flotation technology, identified in the laboratory, and then dated by AMS and then they go back to 1900 BC. So pigeon peak was introduced little later, and it came from Orissa or Bastar, and then you have asinth bean and then wheat coming from Southwest Asian context, but then introduced into India via the Indus Valley and the northern Deccan into southern, during the late Neolithic, early Iron Age, when the expansion, culture area of the late Neolithic expanding northwards into the so-called Jorwe province of the Deccan Chalcolithic and so on. And by about 1500 BC, we have this Hyacinth green of African origin via North Peninsula, pearl millet from Africa, and then you have pigeon pea from Orissa, and also chicken from the north introduced into southern Neolithic and so on. Sorry. So other craft activities included more specialized lithic production, as I mentioned, about the existence of the largest stone axe manufacturing activity at the site, use of pyrotechnology, bead production, and then of course bichrome pottery. And then of course there is evidence of fiber crops, and then indirect evidence of what we call spindle whorls, indicating the presence of textiles in this area. And then I've shown you in the beginning the evidence of copper, those small scale use of copper, and copper occurs in the neighborhood of all these Neolithic sites. The yield may have been very, very low, but yet the ash mound at Kudathani happens to be part of the copper mountain, which was identified by Robert Busford as early as the 18th century. And then you have iron ore resources, plenty of iron ore resources, and this Bellary region is known for iron ore mining and very infamous for the kind of mining activity took place that also led to granite quarrying in this area and so on. And then by about 1000 BC, we have iron objects appearing in the archaeological record. So what we are trying to see here is late Neolithic to early Iron Age was characterized by pre-Iron Age, transitional phase between 1300 BC to 1000 BC, and from around 1000 BC, iron metallurgy, takes an important place amongst these people. And by about 800 to 700 BC, the settlements from the hilltop are abandoned, and then the settlement shifts to landscapes other than the hills and so on. So these documentation has helped in reconstructing shift in production and distribution and social value of ceramics in terms of producing blackened redware, graffiti, and so on, from hand to wheel and so on, indicating gradual transition from domestic economy to political economy. For a very, very long time, we thought that until the emergence of Mauryas in South India, political economies did not took shape in southern India. But we now know, as early as 1300 BC, the courses towards urbanization. Urbanization need not refer to monumentalization of the landscape. There are these various, industrial scale productions that were taking place, be it stone axe manufacturing, be it varieties of beads, of objects of ornament, and ceramics which were produced, on wheel and then set on fire, and bichrome pottery, and also presence of graffiti indicating some amount of authorship or the ownership or the name of the person, craftsman who produced these pots and so on. There are multiple objects of material culture which have helped us identify this transition from late Neolithic to early Iron Age, giving way to gradual urbanization of the landscape. And of course, with the coming of the Shatavahanas, we have this monumentalization here. Even though Ashoka came as early as 3rd century BC, and in the neighborhood of many of these Neolithic sites, we have these minor rock edicts, we do not see the landscape getting monumentalized. But then what we see is the surplus being generated in all spheres. Intensive agriculture, the exploitation of gravity flow of water from the hills, and cultivating winter crops. So double cropping or food production, both Kharif as well as Rabi and so on. Whatever is the scale of production, but intensive agriculture is very much documented from these sites. So the radiocarbon chronology has very clearly helped us, because this area, the sites are not older than about 2200 BC, and the initial stages of all the settlements were characterized by the formation of an ash mound. So most ash mounds that we see here are pre-village ash mounds. They are not contemporaneous anyway, because as I mentioned, these ash mounds came into existence as a result of burning accumulated cow dung up to about 800, 900 degrees, and these villages are wattle and hob huts. And if you have a contemporary ash mound adjacent to the village, you can imagine what would happen. This entire village will be set on fire. So our evidence very clearly indicates that ash mounds predate the village that came into permanent villages which came to be established on tops of these hills. And then from about 1750 BC to 1400 BC, you have a full-fledged village, agricultural village, agro-pastoral communities well settled on tops of these hills also. I am emphasizing on tops of these hills. And then later around 1400 BC, we see a gap in the occupational history of the settlement, but then that is a very short-lived gap. But then we see the emergence of stone axe manufacturing activity associated with the early Iron Age in this particular area. So stone axes were not manufactured by the Neolithic people and at such a large scale. So they came to be produced when the demand for these artifacts, and then the identification of dolerite or gabbro, which cuts through this granitic hill at Sangankallu, was the ideal raw material. This large stone axe factory came into existence. This coincides with the lapidary coming up of the laterary, the textile, and then multiple varieties of raw materials procured from long distances through exchange networks and so on happen here, and they gradually give rise to the coming of these megalithic monuments, which were widely distributed across the landscape because of modern expansion of settlements, agricultural land, and so on. Many of these megalithic monuments on the plain land around these large Neolithic inselbergs have been removed from their position. But we can still, there are historical records and drawings by these early antiquarians indicating the presence of monuments all around, megalithic monuments all around the landscape as early as late 19th century and so on. And why I am talking about these settlements sitting on top of the hills? It is mainly because you can look at these landscape, it is all plain, and these are residual hills. You have this Donimalai hill range, which is the source of varieties of minerals and metals and so on, iron ore, copper, and many manganese, tin, whatnot. Ask anyone, any of these metals and minerals, you have them in this area. And then you have these inselbergs surrounded by these flat plains. Not a single river, not an ephemeral stream flows in this area. But yet we see dense occurrence of these Neolithic settlements on tops of these granitic hills. And why they preferred these hills? And why not any other landscape in this area? What you can see is the gray, soily, plain surfaces all around, but dotted by these black soil patches. Now, why these black soils are there in patches? Why they are not continuous? So why these settlements are on tops of granitic hills? In order to find answers to this, the integrated map of this particular site complex, more than 1,200 acres of land, helped us identify some features which are not generally, visible to the naked eye. So close examination of various fissures and cracks, along the sides of these hills gave a clear evidence for these whitish deposit. We mentioned about travertine in the beginning, but what we see here is a tufa, and this tufa is a product of extinct spring activity. These all rocks are rich in calcium carbonate. If the groundwater, which moves from lower level to the higher level, is obstructed by this kind of dike, and then the obstruction causes water table to, increase its level. And then that increasing level of water table finds its way through the fissures and cracks in the granite as well as in the dolerite. And so springs came into existence. So all along the sides of the hills, you have this gentle flow of water coming down and accumulating in the valley floor. What you are now seeing is a modified landscape, but ancient landscape were certainly different. And then there were these troughs or depressions at the base of these hills. And then spring water used to come and accumulate, and swampy areas were developing. And then these swamps were the ones which gave rise to formation of these black soils. And this gave us a clue to the fact there is something which is been missing, which is buried in the landscape, which we have to identify. And so we made a close observation of this feature, and then came walking up to the base of the hills. All of a sudden, the granitic granules were spherical. And as you go away from the foothill, the granitic granules become angular. And certainly this was because of the gentle flow of water carrying down the granules, disintegrated granules of granite, and then deposit them at the base. So water action rounded them. And then those which are in situ weathering were angular granules of granite. So this was very, very convincing for us. So we traced the presence of these springs all along the slopes, sides of the hills, when water tables were high, and then the settlements were very, very stable. And then with the depletion of groundwater, this calcium carbonate could not dissolve itself, and so it started precipitated and filling up the cracks and fissures and so on. And this was another additional evidence that we could, find and then argue why, or find an answer to the question why the settlements are situated, on tops of these hills and so on. So this is in summary the way in which we were able to reconstruct the cultural history of the time period from 2200 BC to about 800 BC or so. And then what kind of responsibility we had? We had to redeem our responsibility. So why public outreach? Why, if this was the magnitude of destruction that was going on in 1997, by this time, all these hills would have been erased to the ground, and a very, very valuable cultural data would have been lost forever. And that has been happening, at a number of sites, and we have no control on, certainly on all sites. But at last we thought, this is one of the largest, perhaps, the site anywhere in southern India. And so we believed in this particular dictum, a stitch in time saves 9, and so on. And so we launched a public outreach, and with whom you can interact in order to convince people the importance of this heritage. And this is not only peculiar to the Neolithic sites, but also the earlier Paleolithic sites like Jolapuram. We have number of these quartzitic painted rock shelters, and in the vicinity of these rock shelters we have Neolithic, we have megalithic, and then also some of these very well dated Paleolithic sites in this area. This the quarrying of this volcanic ash is also destroying the cultural context that has been documented by us. So how can we go about saving this site, and then at least making the people responsible and making the people aware of their responsibility, and also making the people proud of their heritage and so on, was the target. That was an additional responsibility that we had, and we tried our best to redeem this responsibility. So what archaeology needs the public, as it is all about them. And the more people are involved, the better archaeology becomes for everyone. This is what we have to understand. Without these people, we can't do archaeology. If we have access to these archaeological sites in the vicinity of these villages, unless we have interaction, healthy interaction, and we can make these village people educated, semi-educated, even simple villager understands. He does not always suspect archaeologists as treasure hunters. We have seen villagers hunting many of these sites for treasure as well as even for bricks. But some of the Neolithic sites they don't have brick structures, so they go and dig into these ancient deposits in search of treasure and so on. But that is where we have to convince these people that all that is buried is not containing treasure. There's much more cultural history, much more of our own past hidden in this particular landscape. So interact with them in as simple language as possible, and that is very, very productive approach, I thought. See, the more people are involved, the better archaeology becomes for everyone. The first step towards achieving this was adoption of sites. I can't adopt number of sites. I can adopt only one site during the course of my life, my career in archaeology. Even post university service, I've been able to, as long as I'm alive, I think go back again and again and think of finding ways to make people understand the importance of their heritage. So in this process, we have adapted 3 sites. One is the ash mound at Kodithani. Another is this Neolithic heritage site at Sangankallu, and then preserve the antiquities collected through field work in a systematic way, so that more than the settlements, the excavated material is much more important for research into the past. So establish a catalog and establish an inventory which will be accessible to everybody. And these are the 3 important aspects I have taken up as part of adoption of an archaeological site and a group of sites, because both Kodithani Ash Mound and Sangankallu and the museum are within the short range of about 3 to 4 kilometers from each other. So the outreach and in-reach archaeology. Outreach is with the people, and in-reach is amongst ourselves. What we do during the course of a day in terms of interaction with the villagers. You come back and take, you always, when you interact, you get a feedback. And that feedback helps us to, find ways and means to improve our communication with the villagers. So in-reach is equally important. In-reach is within the group of archaeologists who are engaged in outreach activity, are part and parcel of any archaeological project and should not be separated from the public. So the public also should know what we want to discuss with them and what we have discussed after getting their feedback, and when we go back to them in the next morning. So the main aim is to create new knowledge, which makes room for everyone and breaks down barriers between past and present. So most people do not know. Most villagers, in the neighborhood of these archaeological sites, think that they are not connected to the past. They are, they are independent. They are not least connected to these, what is buried in the landscape. But this is our duty to make them, there is a continuity. You are here because they were already here. That is what we have to convince them and provide information about the past and how it relates to the present. And then emphasize on associating people, village with the sites. Because if any visitor from the village appears on the site where you are excavating, you have to welcome them. You have to tell them what you are doing. Even a small piece of potsherd, it makes sense to us, but we also make sure that it should make sense to them. And that is why, association with people and village is even important. And this is very, very productive thing that we achieved. Necessity to keep sites open at all times to tour and work. Any number of people, they are not interference at all. They are there to help you. And once they realize you are doing something genuine in the interest of their own, history, they will help you in finding sites. This we experience at a number of these places. Public outreach projects have been rarely undertaken in India, especially or rarely undertaken in developing countries, and this has rarely been undertaken in any formal way in India. This is true. I can repeat 1,000 times. There are a few exceptions to this. The examples include Dr. Padaya's public museum at Hunsigi, but it is restricted to the immediate cultural Paleolithic heritage of the particular area. Another best example is Shanti Pappu's Sharma Center, and we all know the activities being carried out at the Sharma Center. I don't have to elaborate on that. And this is a large part of is part of the large-scale multi-year archaeological project undertaken as part of the Bellary and Kurnool districts pre-strip project. Public outreach was intensified as a significant and valuable component of the project. So get to the people and their perspectives, interact with them, help them understand what we are doing, and be careful not to present too much information, and that leads to complications. So that is where keep it as simple and fun. In fact, we devised to attract a method to attract children in particular. And children, you go to each and every house with articles, like toys and then chocolates and then varieties of curio objects, and then freely distribute amongst them. They develop confidence in us. They develop some kind of a respect for us. And then the families begin to adopt us. That is the kind of experience we had. And have everyone share their experience so that they are genuinely involved. There are, grotesque theories about the past of, some people have some knowledge of the past of their settlement, and they have their own theories and so on. Yes, take them into consideration, and then do not dismiss them, and then try to modify, rectify, and explain whether they are right or wrong and so on. Developing collaborative approaches is inclusive as well as diverse. You have to have the villagers participate in your projects. So especially school teachers are very, very important for us. And that is where, as part of the Bellary district, the museum activity, we are conducting workshops for rural school teachers. And then, that is one thing. Bringing into various archaeological activities from the field to dissemination of results of persons outside to the trained professional archaeologists is the main focus of, this outreach activity. This study is reinforcement of the villagers' historic occupation, reinforcing their culture and history and ties to their land. That is why, that is what I'm saying. Usually they are not there, they have a feeling of disconnect between the ancient, their past, and the present. The archaeological sites may not be impressive to the villagers, but it is the stories that we derive, and they are narrated to them, then the sites become very, very important. Though getting community support and understandings are neither easy nor straightforward, There, it is a gradual process. And then the whole village gets involved with you. Just going around the villages and sitting and listening and having plain talk works very well. We were not, retiring to our, camps. We were going into the villages after the field work. In the evening, we were going into the villages, talking to them, making friends with them, and convincing them. We have not come here. We have not come here to take away what is buried in the landscape around your village. We have come here to show you what is there buried in this village and so on. So we need to give something back to the villagers, not simply plain talk and not science and jargon and so on. That is the most harmful thing that you can do. So villages and towns, people, administrators, and are the focus of our outreach activity. And then when we have a settlement or a site very close to an urban settlement, you have multiple varieties of people, categories of people with whom we have to do this outreach activity. And for us, in order to save the site of Sangankallu, we will not only establish collaboration with the villagers, but interact with the district authorities, revenue officers, deputy commissioners, and so on. So it was not easy, to convince educated people about the importance of the site, because they have other administrative issues coming in the way. So that is why it is first and foremost, majority of sites are threatened by development and ignorance. It was recognized that the public outreach project could provide interesting and useful information that contributes to our understanding of the history of the region and symbolic aspects of the landscape. So public outreach has become an important and significant aspect of archaeological projects. I mean, when it came to our research projects across South India, especially in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. When applied to prehistoric landscapes, its productivity is beyond expectations, leads to discovery of invisible sites, makes natives around the sites aware of the new variety of heritage, and makes them feel proud of the remote antiquity of the settlement. This is what, when we were interacting with school children, interacting with the villagers, and then also educated people in the village, they began to identify prehistoric sites and came out running to us. They were also very careful not to pick up these materials, surface material. They would come all the way running to us, especially children. Sir, you come there, I have found this piece, I have found this piece, and so on. And when we reached those places, they were certainly archaeological sites. So this is the kind of excitement we derived through our outreach activity. It is inclusive and reciprocal is, of course, these are blah, blah, blah. How do Southern Indians think about their past? How do they produce and preserve our knowledge? What do they think about archaeology and archaeologists? So we realized that this is very, very essential that we are in constant interaction with them. It is not just to introduce ourselves in the beginning of our project and then not interacting with them at all. So we have to, and once they understand what we are doing, they come back to and tell their own stories about their past. And that is where this becomes much more productive. And then we can give them enough, the correct information, as archaeologists, whatever information we can produce, and then also transmit across these people is very, very productive. As a result, we are now able to preserve this large Neolithic site at Sangankallu. So we have to prepare outreach and enrich material for distribution. So wherever we were working, we used to have brochures and color prints of brochures, showing various archaeological features with a brief introduction and distribute like pamphlets. And then, whatever, even if 20% of the village population appreciates our work, that is the greatest success and so on. So enrich, as I said, it is even more essential because we get feedback through our interaction with the villagers, and then that helps us improve our approach to outreach activity and so on. And so this interaction with the district authorities in Bellary over a period of time from 2002 to 2007 was very, very productive. And finally, it led to establishing a site museum and establish an interpretation center because they are still under construction. But this was going slow. We thought we will have another, a museum in the city which will attract students from, colleges, schools, and then, of course, there are in the neighborhood university as well as research institutions which can also be introduced to the local heritage and so on. So this is the site of Sangankallu Hills Complex, 1,200 acres of land. With the help of the tourism department, way back in 2010, we initiated this interpretation center project. Now, recently, government of Karnataka has sanctioned 5 crores to complete this project. These are the gateways, the columns, part of the gateway arch here. We have the public toilets, and then the fencing, close-up of these pillars, granitic pillars, and then the fencing of the entire landscape, and the pavilions for viewing the site at different elevations, different height, and so on. This is the famous Peacock Hill or the Large Hill or whatever. And we have these pavilions at various points on the landscape, and then also a clear view of the complex of buildings, interpretation center, and then a cafeteria, and so on and so forth. Then the small site museum, which will introduce these visitors, and then the visit to the various archaeological localities on the landscape can be conducted subsequently. So the fencing and all that is going to take place now. Close up of the buildings at the base of the hill here, and then the fences that goes around the entire 1,200 acres of land. And as a result, in addition to our outreach activity with the district authorities, ultimately resulted in providing a building for establishing a site museum. And the IAS officers who were heading the district revenue officers, they were very, very enlightened and encouraging. They said, we give you this building, and we know you have large collection of antiquities. Bring them all here, set up a catalog and inventory, and also start a museum. That is how this museum came into existence. We have named it after Robert Brucefoot, because not only because he is the father of Indian prehistory, but he laid the foundations of archaeological research in this particular region and so on. So we have created a scaled down model of the Sangankallu hill complex in the sunken area. And then the ground floor is focused on tracing the biocultural evolution of mankind from the early Paleolithic to the end of the Mesolithic time period. And then the first floor is fully dedicated to our, explaining the Neolithic of this particular region, the Rayalaseema region. And then the antiquities from some of our excavations are also on display. And then we have the storage facility provided. And then all the antiquities, about 50,000 antiquities are being stored here. And then we are also display is the replicas of human ancestors from different parts of the world, especially Africa and Europe and so on. This is on the ground floor. And the first floor is named after B. Subbarao, because he was the pioneer and the one who excavated Sangankallu site and so on. And this is the complex of hills of Sangankallu Kuppugal area, the Dolorite Dike. And the red lights that you see here is the rock art complex. The green lights that you see here is the megaliths on the landscape. They were widespread all over here, but then the development has consumed them away. This is Sannarachama, where Subbarao excavated, and then these are other hills where we have also Neolithic vestiges and so on. So you have ash mounds, you have Veerappa rock shelter here, and then several of these features are shown. This has to be viewed from the top, basically, then you get a better view and see. And then the ground floor has these dioramas, and then the infographics tracing the evolution, biocultural evolution of man and so on. And the first floor is dedicated to the Sangankallu Neolithic and so on. And this is one of the sarcophagus dating to about early Iron Age, coming from near the Kudathini ash mound and so on. And then it is not only the display of information and then conducting workshops and so on. We have also started a digitization program of all the antiquities. The first phase of work was started in collaboration with our Japanese friends, Sushi Noguchi from Tokyo. And he also has been of great help in providing us technical know-how of how digitization program and so on and so forth. So that is how I thought a stitch in time saves 9 is very meaningfully seen here. I'm very particularly happy to express a special thanks to the authorities of the Archaeological Survey of India. They gave us permission and license to go about working at Bellary as well as in Kurnool area. Directors of the state departments of archaeology, museums in Karnataka and undivided Andhra Pradesh, and successive deputy commissioners of Bellary since 2007, and the government of Karnataka for earmarking resources for the development of Kudathini Ash Mound, Sangankallu Interpretation Center, and Robert Brucefoot, Sangankallu Archaeological Museum at Bellary, and Arun Raj for giving me this opportunity and so on. Please don't go away. Have some more patience. There is much more to follow. I'll come back. I stop sharing. I'll open up another PowerPoint soon for you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Great, sir. Great, sir. Have a cup of tea or something, sir? You would like you would like to have a break?
You have to able me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You have to able me to open the.
Achha. Enable. Enable. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are doing.
Not yet.
Yes, sir. Now, sir.
Disabled. Yes.
Yes.
Can you see?
It's opening, sir. It's sharing.
Okay.
Yes, sir. It has opened, sir. It has opened.
Good.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Only a few minutes. I will not take much time. It's already 6:40.
It is okay, sir. It's okay, sir.
It's okay. People not running away.
No, sir.
Okay. I'm just rushing through some of the infographics on the first floor of the museum building. That's where we have, focus on the Neolithic context here. So most of them are hilltop settlements in the Bellary region, in the Raichur region, and the Kurnool, Anantapur, in all these, the former Rayalaseema, which was, this Maidan region, what we call granite Inselberg or Tor Inselberg landscapes. And most of these Inselbergs were the sites where, the Neolithic occupation began. And then earliest settlements are also likely to be on tops of these settlements and so on. So you have this another clue to identifying these Neolithic sites in the place names themselves. You have many sites with the suffix Banda, Kallu, Gudda, and so on. They are all these Inselbergs. They refer to these Inselbergs, and most of these Inselbergs are generally cut through by dolerite dikes. Not all Inselbergs, but majority of them we see in the area are traversed by these dikes, and these dikes were the areas which attracted them for small scale, large scale stone axe manufacturing activity. So this is the kind of landscape that we see in the area, and this landscape, not only has this plain, what they call made up, ground. That's why early people like Foot onwards, they say that this plateau surface was leveled, and these leveled surfaces were called made grounds, on which the settlements came into existence. Initially ash mounds, and then subsequently the village and so on. So this is the kind of landscape that you see, and then the dolerites cutting through the hills, and then ash mounds at the base of the hills, and then the rock art, both paintings as well as what we call bruisings, petroglyphs as well as pictographs. And then we have the plain land around, and then at the base of hills you also have these ash mounds. And this is the famous site of Pickley Hall, which was excavated by Raymond Hulchin. And then you have these rugged tors, the crevices. Within them, they have these rock shelters, and we do see occupation deposits at the base of these rock shelters and so on. And then the nature of hills, abruptly standing above the ground and surrounded by these flat plains, we call them pediments. And then we have these, Inselberg plateaus and so on. So these are ringing rocks. They are found across the entire Neolithic landscape, over the entire North Karnataka and the Rayalaseema region and so on. And then the similar rock art that we see here. So the Sangankallu site, this is the Google image of the landscape. You see the hills here, the dike here, and then the flat, erosional plain or pediplain, what we see. And then the black soil patches are visible in the Google image. And they were the ones which were former swamps under high water table conditions and so on. So the plateau surface, you have all over the plateau surface, you have human occupation going back in time from about 4,300 years ago to till about 800 years ago and so on. And various types of ash mounds even preserved on tops of the hills, and then the sides of the hills and so on. And then you have evidence of the ancient spring activity and also areas of granite quarrying activity. So this total station mapping was very, very useful in integrating these features into one cultural landscape. So this is the entire region of the Neolithic, southern Neolithic province. where we have the sites of different categories across this landscape. And then in the heartland of this area, you have the area covered by the ash mounds. Ash mounds numbering about 300 were known, and only now maybe 4 or 5 ash mounds have survived. The one at Kudithini has survived because of the wall which was built by one of the revenue officers about 40 years ago. And now we have got about 1.5 crores to develop this site into a destination point for weekenders, and then bring school children and teachers and so on. In the next couple of months, this project is going to take off. The money is being released. There is a thermal power station next to this particular ash mound, and they have come forward to develop this site in consultation with us. They have immediately sanctioned 50 lakhs, and then this work, last week I was there to plan the civil works to be undertaken. And in future there will be floodlights and so on. And then we'll also have stucco emojis of these pastoral community with their livestock and so on. This is all being planned, and I hope it will realize. And some of the ash mounds in the plains that we see, on hilltops that we see, and then again on the shoulder of a hill and so on. And then the close-up, soft ash, vitrified ash, and then buried ash, and then the section of the Kudithini ash mound with Subbarao Alchin's daughter Sushila in the early 50s or so. They visited this site. And then the hoof impressions of cattle found in the ash mound excavated by Raymond Alchin at Uttanur in Andhra Pradesh. And then the rock shelter has been again displayed in detail, and the work that we carried out in terms of excavation, in terms of dating, in terms of analysis of lithic assemblage from here. And all my students who were participating in these excavations were very well trained in all these aspects of Neolithic archaeology, and they also obtained their PhDs on various topics, which were part and parcel of the entire Bellary district archaeological project and so on. So these are the paintings, petroglyphs, and then the excavation revealing the density of the microlithic deposit at the base of this particular rock shelter. So we conducted excavations over a period of 7 years or so, and different designated areas which we called A, B, C, D, E were excavated, and then systematic collection of the material. And then I've shown them in different forms earlier through my PowerPoint, but the same information has been graphically explained in the museum in relation to this particular total station map and the sites which were excavated, area A, B, C, D, and then rock art and so on. And then the way in which samples were collected and processed in the field camp itself. So initial processing of the samples was done at the site itself. Fortunately, the villagers were very, very helpful, and there were some of these horticultural farms with a lot of water resources, and that was enough luxury for us to obtain. They gave away, the shed they had built in their farm, and then all our material was stored here, and processing of samples in the field itself was carried out, and then it was taken to laboratory for identification of various types of grains, charred grains that were recovered through these, processes in the field itself. And then the megalithic structures at the base of the hill, there are these large stone circles comparable to those in Brahmagiri area, excavated by Wheeler, and similar, burial goods, pottery, especially these are the pottery types, and then the human remains, and then the deep pit surrounded by the cane circle and so on was, excavated, and then of course it does not go back to more than 1300 years or so. Iron Age burial, definitely. So these varieties of megalithic burials which are common in the area, you have urn burials, you have pit burials, you have cyst burials, sarcophagus burials, multiple urn burials, and menhirs, and then dolmens, and then on top of the hill. This is the famous Hirabankal in the neighborhood of Bellary area, menhirs in the Bellary region, and then Sankavaram sarcophagus, then Tekkalakota urn burials, and then the Kudithini sarcophagus, and Brahmagiri cyst, dolmenoid cyst burial, and then a dolmen here on top of the Bellary hill and so on. And then emphasis on understanding, we are not as yet the meaning of these petroglyphs, but we have made a beginning, and looking at these varieties of imageries that are found. As I said, the bull occupies a special place, it occurs in single, it occurs in interlocked situations, 4, 5, sometimes 3, and so on. And in addition to that, we do have these red paintings, and then some of these petroglyphs in terms of cupules, and then in patterned cupules, not the cupules that we see associated with rounding of the butt end. And then you have some of these chain of humans performing dance and accompanied by these ringing rocks producing musical sounds, and so on and so forth. So close-up of these ringing rocks and the proximity between these imageries and the the cup marks, is very, very interesting. They're trying to articulate the relationship between these features, and perhaps this was part of a ritual performed by these early Iron Age people. Mostly they are called Neolithic bruisings, but I suspect they are all later Neolithic to early Iron Age features that we have seen here. Because productive landscape and a productive culture in terms of surplus that was being generated and so on. I have also shown these, circular house floors and post holes and the kind of huts that were built here. These are modern examples. They do survive even today in the rural areas of this region. And then the best examples are, in the Sangankallu site. The mining activity, the ancient mining activity compared to modern mining activity. And then we have these features and excavations and the results of this particular sequence of photographs that we see here tell the story of the stone axe manufacturing activity that took place at a large, intensive scale at Sangankallu and so on. And some of these cultural features, procurement of raw material, then the pebbles and cobbles of dolerite, the waste products and discarded ones, and then the in situ occurrence of finished stone cells, and then the stages of modifying blocks of dolerite, grinding grooves, and then bedrock mortars. And then, isolated places, we do get evidence of this kind of grooves, perhaps away from the, area of intense human activity there. And then you can see the depth of this boulder revealing grinding activity having taken place there. And then the destructive quarrying activity that was going at different hills here. And that is what led us to launch the outreach activity. We were most successful in the context of prehistoric site at Jwalapuram, and even more successful in the context of Sangankallu, because the district authorities were very, very supportive, encouraging, and then they also provided a lot of resources to the tune of 2 crores so far. Between 2010 and 2021, it has nearly 3 crore worth investment has been made on our project, generously supported by the district authorities and the local industries, especially Jindal Steels and the KPCL, that is the thermal power station there, as well as National Mineral Development Corporation. We have been able to harness these resources very, very effectively. And now we have this government of Karnataka, earmarking 5 crores for 2 years to develop further these settlements and their preservation and so on and so forth. Yeah, close-up view of various types of pottery that we get. The deeper, mud querns, these are the grain processing ones. Unlike the ones we saw on bedrock, these are the ones where processing of grains was performed. And such of these querns are also found in isolated areas where ash mounds have been found, along with other cultural and biological material. So various types of hammer stones, grinding stones, corn crushers, and chisels, and so on and so forth, pottery, bichrome pottery, and so on. The various stages of processing the soil, procurement of soil, processing soil, and then coming out with a finished product of a ceramic, jar or pot or dish or anything. So we have these are elementary lessons to not for the archaeologists, but for the visitors of various categories who come to the museum. And then we have shown how these different pottery, which are exhibited there, were produced, and then the processes of procurement and processing and so on. And then we have evidence of these lapidary, bead production, and then copper ornaments and so on, coming from the archaeological context, and then the source of minerals. The source of minerals in distant, hill ranges. Distance in the sense 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers is not a big distance. Even 100 kilometers is not a big distance for the Neolithic people to procure raw materials and so on of that particular time period. And then we have these symbolic and ritual objects which are found, terracotta figurines of bull. These are perhaps votive images, and they are found in many of these households which we excavated and so on. And dominantly bull imagery, bull terracotta figurines are very common. And then you have these symbolic features, the rock art, and then you also have these grooves and these geometric patterns on the surface. Theoretical archaeologists will certainly have something to say about them. And then some of the animals which are domesticated, and then they are local in origin, the cattle, the buffalo, and then some of these game animals, aquatic resources. And then during the Iron Age, you have very clear evidence of these arrowheads coming from upper levels. And then, the sheep, goat, pastoralism, domestication of chicken, and several other animals which became part and parcel of the package of economic package for them in terms of animals and food crops and so on. Again, these are the various food crops which were cultivated to begin with. These two sets of crops, and then gradually increasing in diversity with the beginning of winter cultivation associated with the introduction of wheat and barley, and then African crops coming in as late as 900 BC. Jowar and ragi from Africa were also introduced in the area. This research has helped in identifying this southern Neolithic province as an independent center of agricultural evolution, not under the influence of northern Deccan or western Deccan Chalcolithic or any other influence coming from beyond the peninsula and so on. So initially it was a native food crops which were domesticated, and gradually the cultural expansions led to long distance interactions, and then introduction of crops, and then development of irrigation, agriculture, and so on and so forth. Then we have developed a clear chronology. We know dominantly ash mound tradition, because ash mounds were interpreted as the first phase of Neolithic developments in southern India. But now we see that they transgress all these stages of development. And so we have to modify the model generated by the Alchins. And so we think that the entire Neolithic phase, beginning from about 3000 BC to about 1300 BC or 1200 BC time period, we can have three phases of development. And then you can also see that the ash mounds continue to be forming at various time periods, both during phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and so on. And as I said, this different ash mounds have different life histories. Some have 200 years of life history, some have 150, some even have less than 100 years or so. So going back to about 3000 BC or so, that particular range of sites are not known from Bellary area, but from the Raichur region, and then further northeast of Raichur into Mahbub Nagar area. We are likely to have more sites in the range beyond 3000 BC or so. And that is prior to the formation of the earliest ash mounds we have seen so far. Maybe there are ash mounds even earlier than 3000 BC, but we have yet to document. Based on the evidence that we have, the Neolithic ash mound tradition begins from about 2700 BC and continues up to about 1300 BC, which gradually gives way to pre-Iron Iron Age, and then the typical megalithic, and then the classic megalithic or Iron Age beginning around 800 BC till about 300 BC time period, when the first written language appears on the rock boulders in the form of minor rock edicts of Ashoka Maurya. And so we have these regional perspective of various categories of sites that we come across, the landscapes that are associated with the Neolithic activity ranging in time from 3000 BC to about 800 BC time period, and so on. And this landscape approach has also helped us understand the way in which this semi-arid, so-called semi-arid, dry, grassland ecosystems were supporting a subsistence economy based on domestication of millet crops, pulse crops, and then domestication of sheep and goat. Because pastoralism, as we have understood so far, is an introduction into the southern Neolithic province. The sheep and goat are not native to southern India. Cattle and buffalo, water buffalo may be native to southern India, but sheep and goat are certainly not native to southern India. And so we suggest that with the introduction of pastoralism into southern India, the basis for a Neolithic way of life takes shape gradually between about 3000 BC to 2700 BC time period or so. And then a full-fledged Neolithic way of life, and then transition to Iron Age, and then to history. So there is one more site, similar site like Sangankallu. I don't want to go into this particular aspect of the site. Same information, same landscape, same cultural landscape, and that is at Takkalakota. The site was discovered by M.S. Nagaraj Rao. It was excavated under the direction of Professor H.D. Sankalya in the 1960s, and then a full-fledged report was published. And that was the time when archaeoanthropology and then archaeozoology and then systematic understanding of the material cultural remains were carried out by Nagaraj Rao and his collaborators under the direction of Professor H.D. Sankalya. And so the reports have been available. But now Sugandhi has been working from the United States. She has been working, and she has also been discovering new landscape features, especially the ash mounds, which were not known in the 60s, have now been discovered. So that is how going back to the sites which are already known is much more productive than going in search of new sites and so on. And with this introduction, I think I come to a conclusion of my presentation. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. And of course, I'm very happy to address the questions if you have. And these are the Ashokan edicts, which are found at the site called Nitturu and Udegolam. And in front of our museum, we have also brought a huge boulder like this and replicated these instructions right in front of the museum building in the city of Bellary. Thank you, everybody.
No, many. Okay. Yes, sir.
2 hours.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for your elusive and elaborative lecture. Dear friends, I was told by my somebody that former president of Cuba, that is Fidel Castro, used to talk more than 2 hours continuously. Now I can tell to that person that my teacher Ravi Korishetter sir also still can talk more than 2 hours continuously. Yes. Yes, friends. Past more than 2 hours, we have enlightened by the Professor Ravi Korishetter sir by the given topic that archaeological research at Sangankallu Neolithic site and the outreach program, followed by that establishment of that site museum on Robert Bruce Wood Archaeological Museum. In the beginning of his lecture, sir was mentioning about the Mortimer Wheeler's contribution on the excavation at Brahmagiri. Also, the sir was very unhappy about the vertical excavation conducted in those period. Also, unfortunately, organization like ASI also, we did excavation, but in a very minimal way. Sir mentioned some of the examples like Payampalli and Singanapalli. Yes, it is true. It is true. Particularly in South India, we don't have a very big archaeological site. As I'm talking about the ASI site. Also, that we have explored. Yes, we have explored through village to village survey, but we did not give much importance for the next further investigation in the form of excavation or protection of those sites. So that point is well taken. I think some of our senior colleagues also listening this lecture. I think I hope they will take that due fruitful action. Also, sir has mentioned about the earlier discoverers or the surveyors of this particular region, that northern Karnataka, particularly Bellary. Sir mentioned about the personality like Colonel Colin McIntyre and Newbold and Robert Sheeval and many more, up to the Dorian Buller, and a lot of people who were investigated in these regions. Sir mentioned their contribution from time to time. Later in the second part of his lecture, sir concentrated about the Bellary District Archaeological Project, wherein particularly sir mentioned about that problem arose due to the quarrying in 1997, then how with the help of that outreach program, how they stopped that quarry, then eventually how they successfully conducted that archaeological investigation. Yes. Also, sir mentioned about the involvement of that local people. Yes, what we are talking in the ASI in the sense of stakeholders. Sir mentioned the same thing in an elaborative manner. Yes, we should involve the local people. Yes, that is why sir is mentioned that adopt a heritage. Sir here mentioned that sir has adopted that particular heritage of Sangankallu and Kudatini. Yes, so this one is very new for us because what we are already are having the scheme in ASI, adopt a heritage for the school children or college children. College students. For example, school children means Central Board of Secondary Education, that is CBSE. They have already a scheme in their curriculum that each CBSE school should adopt a nearby monument. So now they have to correct that, not only monument, also site, nearby site. Yes, sir. So, interestingly, sir, ASI, as I mentioned earlier, we are doing intensive village-to-village survey. In that, we are coming across many prehistoric sites also. But only thing now we have to concentrate on the further documenting those sites in the form of excavations. Yes, sir. So now I am just recalling the two personalities to sum up this one. One is Boucher D. Berth, as many of you know, the person who discovered stone tools 1838-37. During that period, nobody not aware of this particular branch of prehistory because his background was he was the director of customs. So in the France, in the Somme River Valley, the Somme River. So whatever he collected that time, our so-called archaeologists of that time, they did not agree with his interpretation. That is, these were the stone tools. Later they realized, they told, yes, you are right. So whatever you brought from the Somme River, that is none other than the prehistoric branch. So world has originated before the 4004 BC of according to the Bible. Yes, like that, the same age Boucher D. Berth motivated that time the so-called archaeologists. Now the lecture, your lecture, it is motivating us, sir. So I think we have to do a lot of things for me also, my colleagues also. Another, I'm comparing the discovery of Sangankallu with the particular discovery of Mehergar excavation by the J.F. Jaraj. Because as all we know that the excavation, the interpretation of the Mehergar, it's created a new chapter in the South Asian prehistory. I think we should accept all that in the same way. Now, the discovery and the investigation conducted by your team, headed by Korishetter sir, I think the same way, I think it created a new chapter in the, not only in South Indian prehistory, the entire Indian subcontinent. With this all background, sir, I think we are very happy that the way that you have that establishing or the functioning of that Robert Bruce Wood, I think the museum at Bellary. I think many of did not know even where is that Robert Bruce Wood graveyard is there. I think it is in Erkard, sir. Erkard in Tamil Nadu. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So many of them even. Yes, sir. So many of them even. Okay, sir. Yes, sir. So the father of Indian priestry. So you have, though it is, as you mentioned rightly, though it is financially and administratively supported by the district authorities, but the way you have convinced them to place the name of Robert Bruce Wood appropriately. So it is a well appreciated one, sir. So on behalf of the entire audience and on behalf of the entire team of ASI, we would like to congratulate you, sir, being my teacher. I would like to we would like to congratulate. Now, the respected audience, the lecture is open for the discussion and any suggestion or anything. I think so. Few of you have already listed your question through this one text box. So if anyone want to ask, kindly my request is ask very in a nutshell manner, scriptly, very in a nutshell manner because of the timing. Yes. So now the lecture is open for the discussions. Kindly, anyone is having any doubt or they want to add anything? Kindly go ahead.
Sir, namaste, sir. I'm Dr. Soumya. Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, madam.
Yes,
Soumya,
sure.
madam. Please, madam.
Yes. Sir, actually, I really enjoyed your lecture. I just wanted to know a little more about the themes of paintings in this area found, sir.
These are narratives of the daily grind. They are not narrating anything else. What we normally see in the paintings are very few. The bruisings or petroglyphs dominate the landscape. Most of the imageries that we come across in the petroglyphic context is the bull imageries, repeatedly bull imageries, and rarely some of the animals like antelopes, and then you have peacock, and then groups of humans in a chain, going around, and so on and so forth. But we do not have distinctive panels as such. So the landscape occupies, some in a prominent place, no doubt, on tops of the hill, the summit of the hill, and then we see these petroglyphs dominated by the bull image. Whereas some of the paintings we see, which are likely to be older than the Neolithic, or hunter-gatherer things like wild animals, game animals, and so on. But unfortunately, they are not well preserved. We do have some reconstructions of the last paintings there, get hunter-gatherer category of animals the paintings as such.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Yes, madam.
Thank
Sir,
you.
namaste. Namaskara.
Yeah.
This is Nageshwar Rao from Chennai, sir.
Okay.
I have a small question regarding the
Yeah.
petroglyphs. Sir, I read elsewhere that do we have a three-horned bull over there?
There is one imagery. This is a mythical image.
Okay.
That is why we suspect bull are depicted in a very unnatural way. Although they have clear features of the Indian bull, the humped bull, and so on, the horns especially, they are not realistic. And that is where we think it is a mythic animal or a ritual animal or a deified animal and a fertility deity.
Okay, sir. Thank you. But very inspiring, expansive lecture, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I got another small question. Do we have elsewhere the same petroglyphs or the rock drawings about a damaru or a kettle drum?
Not in the context of Neolithic. We have those ringing rocks, as I told you, to produce musical gong, but not a kind of an imagery where you can identify a damuru or a drum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Kind of you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other participant? Sir, can I request Professor Ajit Prasad, sir, because you have also texted one question, sir. Okay, would you like to ask?
Ravi can read it and answer it. It is curiosity. Yeah, in the very beginning, Ravi, regarding.
You may have seen the shapes of the beads I showed you. They are not different from the beads you have in the Harappan context, and we don't have any other material, to delineate the process of making a bead. We just have these finished ones occurring in the surface. In excavations also, we came across finished goods, and we did not get drill beads or the places where the grooves indicating the lapidary activity and so on. But more or less similar forms, spherical. We don't have these elongated tubular, biconical kind of beads. We have flat discs or spherical beads made from carnelian and so on.
Yeah, I saw them, but
on this,
yeah, I saw them, and I was just curious to know about the drill bits.
Yeah,
because it is not easy to pierce them, to make perforate them. It is not easy to perforate them.
In the rock shelter at Jolapuram, we found an awl perforation. We found an awl there, flat disc.
Okay.
But not here in this context. We have
these ones are actually very hard rocks like carnelian nugget and all. Even for the early Harappans, piercing them in the early Harappan stage was not easy. Only when they actually, only when they actually hit upon this earnest type material, they could actually, which is very peculiar to the Harappan, they could actually easily pierce them. So that is what my curiosity was.
It is the hardest of the material, found in context.
Right.
But they still don't know its mineralogical composition. That's what I read.
Right, that's
I don't-
true. Yeah, that is true. That's true. It's actually, there is an argument whether it is actually kind of fabricated one by heating or it is occurring in nature. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, interesting. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ravi.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, good evening.
Yes. Please.
Namaste.
Sir, namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Sir, the lecture compliments from all corners. That is one part, but so very recently we are thoroughly educated on your presentation on how the Neolithic sites have to be displayed for the benefit of the school children, not only school children, even for the professionals. It is wonderful. Then very recently you visited the Tagarkonta site in Anantapur district, sir. Do you find any similar traits of Sangankallu at Tagarkonta, sir?
Actually, you know what happened when we went there? We went to see that, megalithic feature. But actually, that megalithic concentric circle was lying at the base of an ash mound. And that ash mound has been thoroughly destroyed, dug out and leveled. So when we went there, we went to see the this feature, megalithic feature, but the point, we saw that the deposit. I was wondering what is this particular material. The surrounding landscape is very, very different. And this patch is looking very different. So I went and scrapped some of the sections. It was an ash mound and it is all level to the ground. So I told Rajita to go back and then visit the site. So this is very close to what we call a quartz reef, because in the neighborhood there are likely Neolithic sites, but this one is away from the granitic Inselberg, which is surmounted by a quartz reef. And that was the major source of raw material for microliths, and also there are dikes in the area. So Tagargunti is actually, the name suggests that it is somewhere, located somewhere near a copper, copper source. Tagara is copper, and then Gunta is Tagara Gunta, the kind of a situation. And you are the person who can go and certainly find meaning to the name of the village, as well as related to the neighboring archaeological features. And given a chance, I will also like to join you.
Okay.
Did you hear me?
Sir, what about Kurugodu, sir?
Kurugodu.
About the singing rocks.
Sorry?
Those singing rocks we also found in other area, Kalyan Durgam area also.
Yeah, plenty. In all that, Rayalaseema is, replete with these ringing rocks. What we call cup marks.
Yes. Very nice of you. Thank you so much, sir. I enlightened myself. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Narasimham Kurugod is a much smaller site, but it has late Neolithic Iron Age to early historic transition very clear there. Your department also excavated, Mahadevaya excavated, he got some radiocarbon dates, but I'm not sure if he published anything on that.
Yes, sir. I think he listened, sir. He has listened. Sir. Any other query?
Namaskar, sir.
Oh,
I
yes,
am
madam.
Sri Lakshmi.
Yes, madam. Please.
Namaste, madam.
How are you, sir?
Fine. How are you? You are in Vijayawada, no?
Hello, I am unable to.
Yeah.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are.
Sir, as you told, second part of your lecture was solely on preservation and protection of the sites, as well as public reach, as well as awareness, creating awareness among the public about the sites, etc. But I feel even among our fraternity also, we must change our attitudes towards our protection and preservation of sites, because just by exploring or excavating a site, merely doing that, there won't be that is not sufficient enough,
Yes, sure.
because we may have to go ahead with reaching public and even protection of the site is very, very important, because as you told, those sites are now being destroyed by mining activities and other vandalism, whatever happening over there. So I really appreciate your efforts, sir. Really, it is going to create awareness among public, as well as you'll be the forerunner for other archaeologists to do such things, because it is very, very important to preserve these means especially prehistoric sites, sir. Because people, they do not know until we say something on prehistoric sites, because early historic or any historical sites, we can just understand what it is. But when it comes to prehistory, only
they are not easily visible. They are
so
not.
I really appreciate your effort. Yeah. Yeah,
You are
yeah,
welcome,
yeah.
madam,
Thank you so much, sir. Really, because in Andhra also, as you told, many of the sites are being destroyed by mining activities. One of the site, Chintakunta in Kadapa district, we proposed for protection, but till date, it is still not be protected so far. So it is very unfortunate, but as you told, it is very important. Is even social response.
Yes, madam. Yes.
Because you have mentioned about Jindal, and I think those things are very important, because those people can sponsor, and they can create awareness through some of the organizations in collaboration. Right. So that is very important.
The corporate social responsibility we tapped with this Jindal and KPCL, NMDC, and so on. And with the support, I mean, in fact, the deputy commissioners themselves were approaching them on our behalf, and then they readily agreed to share the responsibility. We got nearly 60 lakhs from 3 of them, the NMDC, Jindal, and then KPCL, and so on. It was a very fortunate.
Good gesture, sir. Really.
I'm a simple teacher, not having any position of authority or power or anything, but I could only approach them, and I was able to convince. That was one satisfying thing as far as I am concerned, that it was effective communication which mattered a lot. And I'm sure IAS officers are extremely good, extremely enlightened, and they care for information that people like me, teachers, professors from university express concern about this kind of landscapes, their preservation and so on. I know we can't all the sites, all prehistoric sites, but some of them are very, very important sites. We have realized their importance, and such sites needs to be certainly preserved for posterity. As I told you, the site of Sangankallu, I don't know, even 100 years from now, there will be something left, uncovered in the archaeological, landscape there. And every time you see something different, something which you missed in the previous visit, and so on. All archaeological sites. For example, Tekkalkota, many archaeologists went. They didn't know that there is an ash mound, but only last 3 years ago, an ash mound was discovered there. So it happens. But you should come.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir, and thank you. Yeah. Definitely, definitely, sir. I will come.
Yes.
Yes, definitely. Yes. I'll visit the museum also. Yeah, thank you.
I want you to come to museum.
Thank you, Dr. Arun Raj, for arranging this wonderful, wonderful lecture. And really, not only because sir is your guru, but the thing is, what he is doing means the public reach, means whatever he is doing for posterity. That is very important. Really, it is enlightening, and means we have to follow him, actually.
Yes, madam. It is a need of hour for us also. Thank you, madam. Any other submission or question or anything? So that we will sum up.
I don't.
Okay, sir. So yes, once again, thank you very much, audience. I think we all are enlightened out of sir's talk, elaborative talk. So let us take that pledge, that including me. Yes, So then the way sir initially told that only Harappan archaeology, Harappan archaeology only we are concentrating, or any other historical period. Now we will concentrate more on the equally on the prehistoric investigations also. Only we need the minimum understanding of that geoarchaeology or settlement pattern of that region to investigate prehistorical site. Also, we need more patience. That's all. Those things only we required. So with this, we are in the end of this today's lecture series, the third lecture of March month by the Archaeological Survey of India, Trichy Circle. I would like to extend my thanks to my colleague, Dr. Atish Kumar, also assistant archaeologist staff, so who has arranged technically this lecture. Sir, we pray the Almighty, sir, because to give more energy and strength for to do more investigations, more discoveries, sir, in this region or in the entire Indian subcontinent. Yes, sir. With this, we are summing up the today talk, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Arun.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Not bore you people.
Yes, sir.
And thank you.